Welcome to the DFO Rundown Podcast with Frank Saravalli and Jason Gregor on dailyfaceoff.com. Delivered by DoorDash.
Welcome to episode 128 of the DFO Rundown. I'm Jason Gregor alongside Frank Saravalli. Oh, baby, what a night of hockey last night, Frank. We're going to have 3 Game 7s on Saturday. We could potentially have 3 on Sunday. It's going to be a great weekend. We got a great guest coming up, Bill Armstrong, the general manager of the Arizona Coyotes. But hey, let's get to the game. A 4-pack of games last night, Frank. Boston, Tampa, and Edmonton all avoid elimination. Meanwhile, the Minnesota Wild elect to go with Talbot. They lose, and pretty convincingly, rather. So I guess let's start with the first game. Boston, Carolina. It's been a homer series. It's 6-for-6, home team winning.
Yeah, it's been the definition of a homer series. And I think what's more shocking than that is how lopsided each game has been in each building. The home team has outscored the away team 29-10 in these 6 games to start the series. So it's been wild and back and forth. And, you know, you look at Bruce Cassidy, another big decision to break up the perfection line, and it seems like it worked.
Yeah. And you know what? Hey, give him credit. You're right, because it's just knowing your team and when's the right time to do it and when's not. And I give him huge props. And they came out, they scored a goal early in the second period, and then they never really looked back. And now they go to Carolina and one game, and anything can happen. And, you know, Carolina obviously would be still very comfortable because they haven't lost on home ice, and they pretty much dominated the games on home ice, Frank. You know, like
they've dominated the series at even strength. They really have. It's been Boston on the special teams that's been the big difference. And I think the Hurricanes are going to rue the missed opportunity that they had in the second period. 4 power play chances, hit the crossbar a couple times, just couldn't get one past Jeremy Swayman. And then when they finally did in the third, it was too little too late.
Yeah, that's why I always counter. Some people suggest, special teams don't matter in the postseason. I'll strongly disagree, man. They matter a lot. And, you know, ask the Tampa Bay Lightning. Toronto's up 3-2 in the third period. They battled back from a 2-0 deficit again. I give the Leafs massive props for that. I thought Game 5 was huge comeback win for them. And, you know, then they take 2 consecutive high-sticking penalties, 15 seconds apart, and Kucherov buries it on the ensuing power play, and we go to overtime. And, you know, Tampa Bay, that's a key timely goal. I don't think Kucherov's been great in that series, but that was a massive goal for him.
He was awful in Game 6 for large stretches and gets that one game tying goal that ends up being really the difference that saves Tampa's season. You know, you can talk about the point overtime goal, but they're not getting to that if they don't capitalize on that 5-on-3 opportunity. And, you know, there's going to be a lot of hyperbole. There's going to be a lot of history and storytelling from the Toronto Maple Leafs and their demons of playoffs past and ghosts of playoffs past. But when I look at the Leafs and where they're at, you know, yes, did they miss another colossal opportunity to knock off the 2-time defending champs with a lead in the third period on the road in Game 6? Yes, they did. They missed another opportunity to go up 3-1 in the series earlier. And these are trials and tribulations, but nothing about this series and the way that it's played out feels anything like the series that they've had in the past where they've just imploded on themselves. And that's not to say that that can't happen in Game 7, because I think there's going to be so much nervous energy there that may be exactly what happens in Game 7. But I think they've at least given themselves a chance with the way that they've played, with the way that they've had their heads on, with the way that they've come back and competed, and really how complete they've played. You look at Game 6, there's not really a lot to nitpick at for the Toronto Maple Leafs. You know, you can point to certain things, and there were some moments that really stood out. Austin Matthews falling in overtime, you know, the undisciplined play, you know, especially while you already had a guy in the box, to go 5-on-3. The first one wasn't even a penalty. You know, if you take a closer look at that, David Kampf, it's not a high stick to the face. It's not even a high stick at all. He caught him in the jersey or the shoulder pad. and it was a great sell job by Cal Foote. None of that is said, Jason, to be an apologist at all for the Leafs. They've put themselves in this spot yet again, not being able to hang on to that third period lead. And I did think if there's one thing to really go after the Leafs about, it was that they did seem a little bit timid, a little bit on their heels in the third for stretches of it before the 5-on-3. But it'd be easy to point to the Leafs and say no chance they win in Game 7, given their history 0-8 in closeout games when they have the ability to move on in the Matthews and Marner era. But it doesn't feel like that.
Frank, I watched the third and the overtime of the Toronto game. Was there missed calls? Because the penalties, you look, there was the embellishment that negated each other. And then, they had the two penalties. Obviously, the Kerfoot's a penalty. And, you mentioned that one. But was there a lot of missed calls that Tampa didn't get, do you feel? Because I saw the post-game interviews and I was like, oh, so I looked and I thought maybe Toronto was penalty killing all night and they weren't. So were they complaining or their silence suggesting that there was calls that they felt should have gone against Tampa Bay?
I didn't really see many. I think there was one. It looked like it was in overtime that Austin Matthews had his jersey pulled for an 8-second sequence as he was, sort of going around the ice in the offensive zone. That's a miss, but it also didn't inhibit him from making a play. He wasn't near the puck. So that would have been one. But, the real miss that the Leafs should be rightly upset about was the first high sticking call on David Kampf. As I mentioned, it wasn't a high stick. You even look in the rule book, the stick has to come above the shoulders. That didn't happen. And maybe some of it, I'm not calling Cal Foote a faker by any means. Perhaps it was just natural human reaction to have your shoulder pad jabbed like that and to jerk his head back. But in this case, either way, whether it was a sell job or not, it changed the game in terms of where the Leafs were at. They go down 5-on-3 and you could just feel it. I had buddies watching the game text me and say, here it comes, and if you're a Leaf fan, you're probably sitting there feeling the same thing. This is the moment where they're going to cough it up. And they did yet again.
Well, they got a chance for redemption though on home ice, and both teams are 2-1 on home ice in that series. And
do they do it?
Do they win?
Yeah.
Oof. Well, I picked Tampa, so I got to stick with my pick. So
I had the Leafs in 6, and I every part of my head wants to pick the Lightning, just thinking that it's going to be so hard to knock off this team that now smells blood in the water, won't be phased at all going into Game 7 in Toronto. There's going to be so much nervous energy. I just have a feeling that the Leafs are going to find some way to finally exercise these demons.
Well, if they do, it'll be full marks, man, because obviously dethroning the two-time champs. The one concern I'd have for if I was Toronto is Vasilevsky in overtime looked like Vasilevsky for maybe the first time in the series. He was excellent because Toronto was the better team in overtime. They had a lot of good chances. And if that spurs Vasilevsky to find his game, because he's given up 3 goals in every game, Frank. And if all of a sudden he finds his game, that could be the difference maker, because so far I think Toronto has negated him. His save percentage is under 890 for goodness sake. So
he was dialed in. He really was in OT.
He was in overtime. So we'll see if that carries over. The Wild, I don't know. I watched the highlights, and obviously you can't watch all the games and they're crossing over a bit, but watching, I didn't see any glaring errors by Talbot. What did you make of the goaltending decision? Do you think that's going to be discussed a lot in Minnesota? Do you think it mattered?
I don't know if it mattered ultimately because the Wild didn't come to play. Their big guys, their big guns were kind of, all nothing burgers in Game 6. And I will say the first goal that was scored on Talbot by Nick Leddy was a soft one. And I felt like that kind of set the tone a little bit. But I don't know that the result ultimately would have been different no matter who they started. And I think when you're looking at that game and that series, that is a giant missed opportunity for the Wild. First off, you had the Blues on the ropes up 2-1 in the series, and to lose 3 straight, that's shocking. if you had told me before the series started that the Blues would win in 6, I'd say, yeah, okay. So like, of course it's a obvious, predictable possibility. But the way this series unfolded with all the injuries on the Blues blue line, the fact that they were able to withstand all of that, they went back to Jordan Binnington. He was lights out in game 6, only gave up 1. I did not see any way that this series played out, aside from maybe the final score. And by the way, you hear that? That's the sound of my bracket being busted because I did pick the Wild to win the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, there you go, Frank. That's a tough one. And then the late game, the Edmonton Oilers, who coming into that game had facing elimination in Game 6 on the road in franchise history. They'd never lost. Now, granted, they were only 2-0, but now they are 3-0. They will host a Game 7, Frank, at home for the first time since 1990, the first round against the Winnipeg Jets when the Oilers came back from a 3-1 deficit. So they'll try to come back from a 3-2 deficit. Connor McDavid was electric, but to me, Mike Smith was good, but the Oilers defense without Darnell Nurse, they did not give up very much to the Kings at all. I thought Evan Bouchard and Duncan Keith really bounced back after 2 subpar games for them. Brett Kulak played a ton. Chris Russell was a shot blocking machine coming out of the press box for the Edmonton Oilers. And, they got gutsy efforts from a lot of guys up front. Leon Draisaitl, that
skating on one leg.
Well, yeah, the Mickey Anderson takedown. I'm actually surprised, Frank. Like when they look at things, that's a dangerous play all day long. When you wrestle the guy down in a scrum like that. He'll probably get a $5,000 fine is what they look at that. But I've never liked those plays, regardless of who the guy is. When you kind of take the guy and then you bend him backwards like that, it's just a cheap, dirty play. I get why guys do it in the postseason. They're high strung. It's emotional, but those are plays that aren't necessary. I don't like him in the game, regardless of who it is against. And, Draisaitl, I'm curious what will happen when he takes his skate off and how he's going to feel in 2 days.
That was really the big concern for me watching him gut it out was like, okay, you can get through this game. And I understand with the season on the line. And of course it will be again on Saturday, but you look at, what's the reaction like from your body once the adrenaline wears off? It's going to hurt a lot worse than it does now. And, I don't know that he was necessarily 100% going into the game. It felt like he was kind of off at varying points in the series. And now you look at this and you say, well, that kind of changes the outlook of the series a little bit. I mean, if he's potentially out for Game 7, and we're obviously jumping to conclusions, but Connor McDavid took this team and put them on his back to start the game. First shift set the tone. Excellent again in the third period. How many times did you say to yourself throughout that third period, wow, like the defensive commitment from Connor McDavid in that third period, like you wish you could get that all the time?
Yeah. And, I'll be stunned if Draisaitl doesn't play. Even if he's on a bit of leg because of the power play, Frank, even if he's playing limited minutes, they'll have him on the man advantage because he's just so good there. And there's obviously not as much skating. And you know what? I thought it was fitting that Tyson Barrie scored the game winner with 5 minutes left. Cody Ceci 2 assists. The Oilers, Brett Kulak, their defense was great defensively in limiting LA. I thought that was their most sound game start to finish. And then they chipped in. They were in on every goal for the Edmonton Oilers. And that's huge in the playoffs. You need kind of some unheralded guys and a 2-point night from Cody Ceci and Barrie with the game winner. And, Evander Kane scores twice. Granted, one's into an empty net. But, now it's Game 7 and anything can happen in Game 7. It'll be entertaining. The Kings, though, hey, they're going to feel comfortable. They've won 2 games already in Edmonton. I don't think they're going to come in there overwhelmed at all.
But all that said, as well as the Oilers played, they still didn't exactly make it easy on themselves. Like it was still some really sweaty moments there in the third period, tied 2-2, under 10 minutes to play, their season on the line. They did have an edge in this game that they gave up again.
Yeah. Well, yeah, fair enough. The power play goal from Dursey, I don't think it's a bad play. And, I'm not even sure there's a massive breakdown on the Grundstrom goal, but Frank, the Edmonton Oilers have lost 10 consecutive 1-goal games in the playoffs. 10 consecutive. And that to me, that was a 1-goal game up until, the final seconds of Evander Kane. I think for the Edmonton Oilers, and obviously you give up a few chances on that power play right before the Kane goal. Mike Smith made 2 or 3 unreal saves. It was huge for them. But I felt the Oilers, they didn't have their glaring giveaways, which has plagued them in their 3 losses.
We talked about that a few times, right? They didn't beat themselves.
Yes.
That was really the thing that stood out. Even going back to game 1, Mike Smith, they beat themselves with the turnover. Game 5, they were awful to start. There was lots of different moments throughout the series where you say to yourself, okay, they don't have it. And they had it really, you could tell that the tone was set. And I think that starts with McDavid right from puck drop. I never got a sense that they were losing that game.
Yeah. Now, quickly, Frank, you look at Sidney Crosby's storyline, man. That his injury completely changed the game in game 5. The Rangers come back and, come from behind. They win that one. And now what are you hearing on Crosby? Any chance he's playing in game 6?
Okay, so we're taping this at 1:30 a.m. Eastern time on Friday morning, and the games have just wrapped up from Thursday night. Every indication that I got Thursday, and again, subject to change Friday. I have no idea I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know how Sidney Crosby is going to wake up. I don't know how, what the Pittsburgh Penguins have planned in terms of precautions or anything like that. Every indication that I have, if I can couch that properly enough, is that Sidney Crosby will be out for game 6.
Okay. And hey,
probably not a huge shock given the way that he left the game, but that's the sense I've gotten.
Here's the thing. Just when you count the Penguins out, I would never count them out. I don't know if there's an organization that plays better when their big guns go out. They've done it for years, whether it's Malkin, whether it's Crosby. Heck, they won a Stanley Cup without Chris Letang. Like, that organization doesn't use losing their best players as an excuse. And so the Rangers, if they try to sleep on the Pens, who are at home in game 6 without Crosby, Frank, I think that'd be a very dangerous thing to do, because Pittsburgh they got a long list of games where they win without their best guys.
It would, but I've never seen a game change like that with one player leaving the game the way that game 5 did on Wednesday. I'm sorry. That's fair. I haven't. And the way Crosby dominated the series to this point.
Yeah.
I think it's series changing, and I wouldn't be surprised at all to see the Rangers come back and win the series.
Well, Frank, we could be seeing potentially 6 games. I think the Rangers definitely without Crosby have a really good chance.
So give me your picks. Let's go through them.
I will take the Rangers in game 6.
Okay. So that brings us to game 7. Then what?
Yeah, I'll take the Rangers. Well, I picked them at the start, so I got to stick with them.
So you're going to go Rangers in 7. Okay.
Yeah.
Caps, Panthers, game 6.
Well, see, here's where I'm torn, because I picked the Panthers, but I really want game 7. So I'll say this. How about the Caps win game 6 and the Panthers win in 7?
Okay. I could see that.
And
now, that leaves Flames, Stars.
I think the Flames have figured out the Stars. The Stars just can't score. So I'll take Calgary in 6.
I'm totally with you. I think that game 4, they cracked the code.
Yeah.
Coming back.
Even in game 5, Frank, like, they're up 1-0 Dallas, and then the Flames pot 3, and they got some guys who had done nothing in the series. Mangiapane scores. I think you start to get some more confidence up and down your lineup. Calgary's done a great job. Dallas isn't a very good offensive team. Let's make that abundantly clear here, right? They're one of the worst offensive teams in the league in the regular season. So, you know what? Hey, maybe they shock me, but I can't see them winning the next 2 games. Maybe they squeak out at home, but they can't find a way to score in Calgary.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that brings us to the game 7s on Saturday. So you got Leafs, Lightning. You said you're going Lightning?
Yeah.
I'm going to go Leafs. And then you've got Edmonton and LA.
Yeah, well, I picked the orders at the start, so I'll stick with that. Plus, I think the Connor McDavid factor, again, is rather large.
Okay, and the Bruins and Canes.
Oh.
Didn't you pick the Bruins to start?
Yeah, I picked the Bruins, so I got to stick with
7,
my picks.
Right? You said Bruins in 7.
I did say Bruins in 7, so you know what? Hey, road teams got. Well, someone says the series doesn't begin until the home team loses, so I guess we'll see if that's true or not.
I had the Hurricanes in 7, so I'm going to stick with that as well.
Yeah, well, it came right to it, man. That's been a close series for sure. So, it's a lot of fun. Why don't we get to our big guest now? Brought to you by DoorDash. If you've never used DoorDash, use the promo code RUNDOWNDD. That's going to get you 25% off your order and no delivery right now at DoorDash. Ding dong. Very special guest joining us today on the DFO Rundown. He was drafted by the Philadelphia Flyers in 1990, went on to play 8 seasons in the American League and went directly from a player to an assistant coach, then moved up to a head coach for 4 seasons in the AHL and the ECHL. And then he switched to management, was hired by the St. Louis Blues in 2004 as a scout, became their director of amateur scouting in 2010, was then promoted to assistant GM in 2018. And in September of 2020, he was named the 10th general manager in Arizona Coyotes history. Bill Armstrong joins us. Bill, welcome to the pod. How you doing?
Well, thanks for having me, guys. It's great to be on.
Well, that's quite the resume you've had, Bill. You've touched a lot of bases on your way up to GM, which doesn't surprise me. And also, I will say, the best dressed guest we've had so far on the pod.
I appreciate that. That's
wearing the tie.
Nice.
I like it. So let's get into a little bit, Bill, to kind of your career path. You know, you'd won the Memorial Cup with Oshawa, and then you were drafted a month later or 6 weeks, whatever it was. And so you tried the pro career as a player. Then you went to coaching. What changed from coaching for you to say, now I want to go to management?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I think I'd learned enough in coaching. Coaching is going to law school. It's important to have it in your background to kind of understand the grasp of just being around the players and what's it like to actually work with those guys all the time, be behind the bench where they're rubbing on you with their personalities. And you know, when I got done coaching, I ran into a guy named Gordy Clark, and he had helped me be a player in the Bruins organization. He had brought me in, and I talked to him about scouting. And I figured out that where I lived in the Providence area, there was 31 Division I teams around the area. And I was like, okay, well, that's what I want to get into. I think I could do a really good job as a scout. And I kind of set my mind. So I sent my resume out, and nobody got back to me. Like nobody. There was a lockout that year, or strike, whatever you want to call it. And like, it was just crickets. And I was like, ooh, this is going to be a little tougher than I thought. So right at the end of the summer, I got a phone call from Larry Plow saying, hey, listen, we want to interview you. Our area guy's leaving, and we've got a space for you. We'll fly into Toronto. And I met with the head guy was Jarmo Kekalainen. And Jarmo didn't ask me any questions in the interview. He opened up the computer. He showed me RinkNet. He said, just kind of like, you got the job. And years later, I said to him, I said, like, why didn't you ask me some questions, like, you know, about, you know, what type of player? And all. He goes, Frank J., who's a good friend of his, who was like amazing scout, said, hey, listen, I'd hire Bill Armstrong in a second. So that was good enough for Jarmo. And we rolled, and I ended up working for the Blues for 17 years. And that was kind of my path to get in there.
Did you ever find out, or in conversations, what was Frank so high on? Why was he like, hey man, I'm hiring this guy right away? What was your skill sets that endeared you to him?
Well, Frank was the GM of the Oshawa Generals, and we went on to win a championship that year. So he knew how hard I was as a worker, and he kind of knew me as a person inside and out, and as a teammate, you know, he'd kind of see me work with my teammates. So I think he had a good idea who I was, and I had the right background too. I had coached and played, and he liked that. So I think he had a good understanding of who I was, and kind of vouched for me. And that was my career path to kind of start out with the Blues and get along to work with Larry Plow and Jarmo Kekalainen, and later on Doug Armstrong. So it was a good place to be, and it worked out.
So, Bill, you've had some time to get your feet wet. You spent a long time as Doug Armstrong as one of his right-hand men. What's been the biggest eye-opener for you just being in the chair since you've been in Arizona?
Well, it's like drinking out of a fire hose when you first get the job. It's just it's completely like, you know, from the time you sign the contract to go, you know, you walk out that door, it's the draft, it's the free agents, it's the signings, it's the coaching, it's, you know, so I love the fact that, you know, when I came in here, I had the ability with our ownership to kind of restructure the team. And kind of put in place not only off the ice of the people that I wanted to run the draft and the pro staff, but also on the ice. So there was a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of work. Obviously, our organization is in the rebuild, retool, whatever you want to call it, mode. So it's not glamorous when you're in this kind of rebuild. There's a lot of I guess you experience a lot of losses at times. So it's not great for the franchise, but in the same sense, you get to change how the franchise looks and the players you add through the draft and through free agency, or the guys you find over in Europe can make huge difference. So I'm excited about the fact that we've kind of rebuilt underneath from the ground up, and here we go.
So you mentioned the rebuild, and clearly the process is a big part of that, putting all of that in place. Curious from a scouting perspective, this is such a big draft for you guys this year coming up in a few months. When you look at the process and how that this has unfolded, it also feels like it's happened at the same time that scouting in the NHL has really changed a little bit. There's been less of an emphasis from the teams that I've talked to, certainly on in-person viewings, and way more video work being done.
Yeah.
Can you shed some light on, what it's been like for you guys in your organization in terms of, really making sure you get all the viewings that you need, both in person and in video?
Yeah, it's a great question. Because I think the pandemic has led the scouts to want to know the players better, because they've taken what they've learned in the pandemic of studying video, but also mixing it with some live views and mixing it with some analytics. You have a better understanding of the player. So I think scouting has changed simply because of the pandemic. They want to know the player better, and that's what analytics and that's what video does. You'll never know the player really till you see the body language, when they get to the bench after the coach pulls them and all that stuff that you can't really see on video. There's stuff off video, like the pace that the player kind of plays at. There's certain things that you can't see on video. So live viewings are really, really important. But at the same time, to know the player better and inside and out, to do a great job as a scout, those tools of analytics and the tools of video are just like they're great for scouts. The harder you work, the luckier you get in scouting, and that's two tools you can use to be a better scout.
Do you think we'll ever get to the point, Bill, where there's only limited live in-person viewings that are needed, in the sense that, you mentioned some of the things, the boxes that you need to check, body language. If you're looking at a defenseman, you want to know, and you really can't see it on video, how do they manage their gaps, things like that. Yeah. But really that the purpose of scouts or scouting will be almost like investigative reporters, in a sense, not that you're digging for dirt, but your key as a scout will be to get to know the player and what makes them tick, really, before you even call their name in the draft.
Yeah, I have this theory. It comes from my dad. He owned all these companies, and they eventually all went extinct. And my thought process was this: change before you have to. And in scouting, in the world of hockey, it's always changing. One day there was, you had 5 fighters on your team. The next day you woke up, there's no heavyweights left in the league. It's always changing. And you have to stay up on the trends as far as scouting. And I think, with all the SMT data and all the other data coming in, and even if you take gambling, they're studying numbers, and those numbers are going to make us more efficient about predicting goals and all the things in hockey. So numbers are important. Analytics are really important. I'm not so sure that it'll completely take away from scouting, because there is some greatness about seeing that player live, seeing how he interacts on the bench with his teammates, and how he does, if it's a goaltender gets scored on, and all of a sudden you see his body language. There's some greatness about seeing that person live. But I think what you're talking about with the analytics and video is that the actual draft itself and the lists that are produced of teams are going to become more accurate because of the video and because of the knowledge from analytics. They're going to be way more accurate.
Bill, when you use analytics, some people like to call it information, right? The more information you get, how have you discerned what is the right information and what can be misleading? Or maybe not tell you what you think the numbers are saying?
Well, it's good. Yeah, that's another good question, because analytics can be very misleading, and there's a lot of things you don't need to measure. You don't need to measure how quick he gets to the bench. Like there's certain things you just don't need to, to measure. But there are some things that are really, really important. But what you have to understand behind the scenes is like, well, okay, you're comparing, I remember the draft with Dubois and Laney. they had analytics. It was kind of like the first time we had seen them in the amateur side, and they had 11 viewings of each player. Well, Dubois was playing against 15 and 16-year-olds. Laney's games were at the World Championships. There's a massive difference of that. So when they presented him, the analytics didn't look right until you really got in and deep and you asked a lot of questions. So I think as we move forward and we understand, the accuracy of the analytics and the evenness of the analytics and what you're measuring, they can really, really help teams out, and they can really be catered to what the team wants in their identity.
You have a background, of course, as an amateur scout and then director of amateur scouting. Then, of course, as assistant GM, you evolve into pro scouting. Can you talk the difference that you've like, is amateur scouting much more of a projection a little bit, Bill? Whereas when you're looking at pro scout, it's a little bit more of a finished product to say, hey, we think this guy can fit in our puzzle right now.
Yeah. Amateur is very humbling. You'll walk in a building like, that kid will never play. And, 6 years later, you're like, like, I got to go back and think about that one. Like, how did that person play in the National Hockey League? It's a humbling job because of the change in that you see from the kids when you first see them at 15 to the time, they're 20 years old. The amount of change is, some kids just get it. Some kids experience something, that causes them adversity, whether it's their girlfriend or their parents getting divorced or the coach is not playing them or some point in time, and they grow because of that. And other kids don't grow as much. So sometimes when you see the pros, they kind of are who they are when they get to a certain point, and they're a little bit easier to predict. But amateurs change, and there's a lot of things behind the scenes you can't see that influence the path of an amateur player.
And I wanted to quickly ask you about that aspect of the human side of scouting, right? Like, you use the word adversity, and I find, a lot of the top end picks, they're the best player on their team. They've never not been on the power play or anything. Like, is there a way to find out which guys, maybe have the thicker skin who are going to be able to deal with adversity at the pro level when they never really had it at their junior or college days?
It's an amazing education for me. Like 20 something years, I've sat in those rooms and interviewed players, and the ones that have had some type of adversity, whether it's a speech impediment, something's happened to their mom or dad, how strong that has made them. All the top 10 kids in the draft, they look the same. They come into the room, they're like King Kong. They scored 50 goals. They got, confidence comes from a source. It's, how good they are in junior, and they come walking through in their flashy suits, and they're like, and then some guys, it doesn't translate, and it really affects them because they're not used to that adversity, and sometimes it breaks them. Other guys, they'll come back, and you see the Jack Campbells of the world where all of a sudden they experience some adversity, in pro, and he battled through it and somehow find a way back to the NHL. Some guys it breaks where they never do. But adversity is, and it was great for me as a parent just to be in those rooms. I'd tell my kids about some of the stories and what kids went through to be a player. And I always found like the parents that were the toughest on the kids and held them to the highest standards, their kids actually, kind of accepted that, and they were like, mom and dad are driving 8 hours, I better work hard. And, that influenced me. My son has gone on to have a pretty good college career at BU, and I would tell him the stories about the players all the time. And I think that actually helped him to learn how to work harder.
Bill, you mentioned adversity, and when you're going through the rebuild, some of the losses that pile up can be tough for the guys that are, in the current roster to deal with. We heard some candor from Jakob Chychrun to close out the season. And he expressed, some of his thoughts about, the lack of winning and how that's impacted him as, a proud competitor, like so many guys on your team are. What do you make of those comments? And obviously it's a tough spot to be in, having his name been out there, in the trade rumor mill the last number of months, to then stick through the deadline and now have this sort of uncertain future facing him again this summer.
Yeah, I think those comments are natural. If you're getting off the plane every night and, you're not winning, it's tough. I don't care who you are. We were fortunate that we had great leaders in our locker room, with the guys like Jakob Chychrun, but also the Lads of the world, the Beagles of the world, the Strawmans of the world, and the Roussells, and they make a huge difference. And I tried to study the rebuilds in basketball and some other sports going through it. And one of the things that we found out was you got to have good character, because it can really go sideways when you're going through the rebuild. And you have to remember, the one thing you have to worry about when you go through the rebuild is like really being focused as an organization on the process. And we talk about this a lot of times. It's like, from the analytics to our coaching staff, to the way we run practice, to the way we eat, we have to worry about perfecting the process. And that's what we get the players to buy into the whole time, is how to practice better, how to eat better, how to work out better. And we tell them, like, listen, 5 years from now, we plan on, being a championship team and a championship organization. We've got to work from now till then to perfect it. And that's one of the things we concentrate with the players in adding good leaders like that. It's a smoother ride because there's something to get from the season. And I understand the comments sometimes that come out of the players, but at the same time, you got to battle through it. You got to battle through it. And you got to worry about perfecting the process and being a better teammate and learning how to play harder. And when you do that, good things happen at the end.
So when you go through that process, there's going to be casualties of it, right? I mean, There just are. It's a fact of life. Not everyone wants to be in that spot. And I don't think, even if Jakob Chychrun were to raise his hand and say, I don't want to be part of it, it's not an indictment on him. He's got only so many years to compete in his career to chase something. How do you manage that as a manager? What's the key to it? Is it open communication and dialogue? What do you do?
Yeah, I think that's correct. I try to be very transparent with the player. I try to be very honest with the player and tell them, hey, listen, this is where we're at as an organization. I understand your concerns, but it's also a business. At the same time, we can't accommodate everybody's wishes on the team. Everybody wants to play first line. Everybody wants power play. That doesn't always happen. And just because you're not happy with your situation doesn't mean that we can fix that now or maybe 3 years from now. Who knows? We're going to deal with it on a day-to-day basis, and we're going to worry about the process, and we're going to expect you to dig into it. And we understand your wishes, and hopefully at some point maybe we can accommodate you if it benefits the club. But that's the biggest thing that we kind of make sure that it's got to benefit our organization. So.
Bill, I want to talk about your experience in St. Louis, because really leading up to the Stanley Cup final from 2012 to 19, you guys had the second most points in the NHL. Like, you were a really top team, but no, you weren't necessarily, and even in 2019 up until Christmas, no one thought you guys were going to be the Stanley Cup champion that year. I think it's fair. But
we didn't either, because we were watching Hughes at the World Juniors. So
yeah. When you look at that 8-year run, and you were director of amateur scouting, and then you moved up into the assistant GM role, building your way up, and just kind of the process of that it wasn't just, hey, now we're good. We're into the conference final. Now we're going to be in the conference final every year. Like, it doesn't work that way in the National Hockey League. There's lots of the trials and tribulations and valley. What did you learn during that time that you hope to take to Arizona? Because it looks like you have a big picture plan that there's no quick fix for.
Yeah, there's no quick fix here. We're the same as St. Louis. It helps me that I went through that with St. Louis. The biggest thing that I tell all our guys is just keep drafting and acquire good players. Stack one good player on the next good player on the next, and be patient about that process. And we've been lucky. Like, we've been able to acquire the guys like Gunther last year in the draft. He's going to be a really good player. He's having great playoffs. We got him at 9, and then all of a sudden we got JJ Moser. He played for us. He was one of our top 4 defensemen, and we got him at 60, I think, at the draft. We got Veg Malco. We picked him up as a free agent. So we've added these little pieces very quickly to our organization, and that's my big message to our organization. Keep adding good player on good player and good player. I believe we've got the most picks in the next 3 or 4 years in any other organization. And we're still going to try and add more, and we're going to try and do it through drafting. If you look at the 10 last 10 teams that have won it, it's all the draft. It's the same common theme. Guy picked at 1, guy picked at 2, or it's 1 or it's 5, but it's the same. You've got to find your impact players at the top of the draft at some point. That's going to help drive the organization through, and you've got to have great scouting. I think the other lesson I learned from the Blues is we had 2 major issues with the Blues that had huge setbacks for us every single year they occurred. We played LA or played Chicago, and they actually went on to win the Stanley Cup, and they stopped us from getting through that. And it made us a better organization in the sense that we had to go back and draft better players and just really fine tune it and become a better organization, a grittier, tougher organization that could compete in those big moments. And I think when we had faced those teams and the losses we had in the playoffs, they were great series. It might have been some of the best series that those teams had played. And it's just a battle. And I think we did a good job at kind of drafting and acquiring better players for those battles. It made us better in the end.
Bill, when you look at last summer and how it played out and how you aggressively leveraged your cap space, not only to acquire more draft picks and assets, but also to fill out your roster. And you mentioned the leaders that came in as a result of that. It's sort of a nice bonus or byproduct. And there were some really big hits too. Like, I have to give you props. Shane Gostisbehere, 50-point defenseman. You got the Flyers to give you a 2nd round and a 7th round pick in order to just pick up the contract. Do you envision yourself being in a position to do the same or similar type thing this summer where you're using that cap space to your advantage?
Yeah, I mean, teams get to a point where they're trying to win a championship, and they've got a clear cap space. And last year, I think they were able to do that a little bit with Seattle too. But this year, there might be us and maybe a team that does it. It's an advantage for us because we have so much cap space to do that. And it helps us, if we're patient with the process, to gain more draft picks through it. We're gonna go through the same summer as we did last summer and approach it the same way. Try to take on some deals and acquire some picks because of it. And I think it benefits teams that are going. That they need to clear the cap space, whether it's 6 million, 7 million. And we can do that for them. So I think it works in both ways. It gives the team a little bit of freedom, and it gives us some draft picks. So we're going to try and do it again this summer.
There's no greater asset in the NHL today than cap space. When you go through that process, what's it like? Are you calling teams, or do you just basically put a sign out there on your lawn that says, hey, I'm open for business? How does it work? Are you actively approaching teams with ideas that may have some salary cap pinches, or do you let them come to you?
A little bit of both, but sometimes I see some stuff and I'm like, hey, we could do this for you. I think when you do deals with other teams, you always have to put yourself in their eyes. Like, does it work for them? Like, it's got to work for both clubs, so it depends where are they at in there? Are they going for it this year? So I think you just try and reach out to GM and say, listen, I think we have something here that would work for us because you guys have the picks and we can take the cap space, and that's going to allow you to bring in a nice player through the door, at free agency. So you just got to explore that. I think sometimes, everybody knows the cap and what everybody has. So you just try to reach out with some ideas, and it's got to work for both clubs. And hopefully there's something we can get done along the lines of what we did last summer.
Bill, during the season, you talked about wanting to build a good culture in your organization. Phil Kessel was, chasing the consecutive games played. The organization lets him take a shift and then leave a game so he can go home. Obviously, the birth of his first child, which is a pretty monumental thing. Some people might not, old school 20 years ago, I don't know if that would ever be even considered, right? Like, things change. Gary Unger lost his consecutive streak when his coach didn't play him a shift in the game, even though he was dressed, right? Like, just things are different now. How important is the human element for you? And even though maybe we're not winning right as much as we have, that I want people to feel like I respect them as humans. Well, how important is that for you?
It is interesting. It's something, I studied a lot, and tried to really have a good understanding of the job I would walk into one day. And it's one thing that I didn't spend, enough time probably is understanding what 1,000 games means to a player, and some of the other streaks. And inside your locker room, your players are very protective of the other players, and you have to respect that. And you have to try and, we actually had the ability to put Andrew Ladd in there after he had missed a couple of years, and he got to 1,000 games. And the same thing with Louis Eriksson, and we're able to continue Phil Kessel's streak. So if you want your players to play hard every single night and bond as a group, there's certain things that you can't cross them with them. And those were a couple of things for us that were really important to the players. And they were also important for us as an organization to see if we could make them happen. And we're able to do that during this season. And I believe, that's probably why you see our team fought to the end. We 3 games, I think we were down 3-0, 4-0. And we were able to come back and have some wins. And we played competitive hockey all year long. So I think
you guys were the main reason, to quote Daryl Sutter, that Nashville had a waste of 8 days because you came back from a 4-0 deficit in the final game of the season. Speaking of this upcoming draft, you have 7 picks in the first 2 rounds. Do you balance off when you look at those picks, say, well, we don't want all of those guys, coming and turning pro at the same time. JJ Moser, you just mentioned him. You draft him a second round. He's an older player, right? He came in right away, where a lot of these other kids, some are 17 or 18. Does that become part of the process when you have so many picks to ensure that there's not a glut of prospects all at one time?
Yeah, I mean, you do have to balance it with contracts, and there is some juggling on that end. Also in the development, your development staff goes from handling 11 players to 21 players, so you have to employ more development guys, and making sure the process behind the scenes, is really, really effective for handling that many players that are coming through your organization. There's a whole strategy behind it that we've tried to study as much as we can, and what's going to happen when all these guys come through the door. So we've tried to really work at that behind the scenes and have an understanding that we're going to probably draft more players in the next 3 years than any other NHL team. And what are we going to do with those players? And how do we evaluate them the best and know the ones we want and the ones that we don't want? And there's a process behind the scenes that, you've got to employ extra people because the amount of players that will be drafting the next 3 years.
So do you plan on putting more resources then into your amateur scouting, simply because of that?
We kind of, that was my first thing I did, is started hiring amateur scouts. I mean, if you think about our staff, we have a couple guys like that cross over from pro to amateur, but we've had 4 guys on our staff that have picked at one, Larry Plow, Daryl Plandewski, Ryan Janikowski, and Alan Heppel. So we've got a really experienced amateur staff. And from me being in the field, I knew the guys that I wanted right away, and we went after them. And that's the one thing I talk about all the time. As I walked across the parking lot after I did the press conference for the job, I said, like, what makes me any different than the other GMs that were here? And my thought process was just to make sure that we have the best amateur scouting available and go out there and get the right people. And that was the one thing that we try to do from the moment I got the job.
So what is your strategy then? Because you sat as a director of amateur scouting, and the draft is kind of like your Stanley Cup, right? You put in all these hours. Do you let your head of amateur scouting make the final decision, Bill, or are you? How is that going to work on draft day? Because I'm sure there's arguments. I really like this guy, and I really like this guy. How does that final decision going to happen, and where will you stand on that?
It's another good question. Doug Armstrong, I thought, was amazing with me when we went through the process. He guided you like, hey, listen, we're not taking a 5'6" guy, or we're not taking this guy because we got so many of these guys. Like, he was really good in guiding, but he never really laid the hammer down. It just had to make sense. And that's what my thought process is with my guys, is to guide them a little bit, give them some ideas of what we need, in our thought process around drafting certain players. But really, it's their call. They're on the road the entire time. They have huge impact on the decision that comes about when you're drafting high.
Bill, how does moving to Arizona State impact your team and how this process unfolds over the next few years? And I realize it might sound like a dumb question, but just talking to some players, there's been some concerns and frustration about, what that, I don't want to say atmosphere will be like, but what that will look and feel like for a team that's going to need to park there for a few years.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've actually had a tour of it, and it's going to be very intimate inside that. I think it's almost like, I think people would just come because it's like
quirky.
It's like, it's something different that the NHL has never really seen, is that intimate. And we're going to try and use it, to make it loud, and and our style of hockey that we play. I think Coach Tournay's done a great job with playing a physical brand of hockey in that small barn, we'll call it, and get the fans excited. I mean, we play a fast brand, and it's a hard physical style that he plays. So it's going to be exciting, and that's in the intimate arena. Obviously we haven't seen him played there, so I mean, that will kind of develop as we go. But the players have expressed some concern in some areas. We've tried to say, hey, listen, we're going to build an NHL locker room there. We've added on to our facility and our practice facility. So there's some things we've done there. It's not the perfect setting, but it's an interesting one at that.
But it also requires some buy-in. Like we were talking about that just a little bit ago about, you want guys that want to be there, but at the same time, you might not be able to accommodate the guys that don't. How do you balance it all out?
Yeah. We're in a different environment down here. So, like, first thing when I took the job is like, people would call me. I'm like, we're gonna go through the rebuild. It's out there, and all of a sudden, your phone's ringing. Hey, my guy wants to come to Arizona. You're like, it just doesn't stop. Arizona is just, the lifestyle itself is probably the most beautiful place you'll ever be in the middle of winter. And for some players that don't like constant attention, it's an advantage, because when you go out to eat at Mastro's, there's 22 other sports athletes that are eating there from some country somewhere, and nobody really cares. So you have a complete freedom of being down in here in Arizona, where you could take your family out to eat and nobody bothers you, where maybe you don't get that in some high markets. And it's not for everyone. Yes, we're not Madison Square Garden. It's not the big show, but not everybody wants the big show. So for us down here, you can golf in the middle of winter. On your day off here, you can go hike. You can go walk your dog every day. Like, there's just different things that you can do. It's an easy way to live. And last I checked, your wife has a huge impact on what you do. Anyways, in my house, it does. I mean, she's not happy. Nobody's happy. And every wife wants to live in Arizona. So let's get that straight. Take a poll. It's unanimous.
Fair. Definitely fair.
Yeah.
And we have good taxes. And the last thing, we throw free vitamin D for the families all the time. We get sun every day. So it's all good.
Bill, you have Phil Kessel, Louis Eriksson, Jay Beagle, Antoine Roussel, Anton Strawman, all UFA pending veterans. Yeah. When you're in this part of, wanting to build a team and wanting to have a successful one, I've seen a lot of rebuilds, and sometimes they just get rid of all their veteran guys. Oh, we're going to go with youth. Well, youth just gets their teeth kicked in all the time. How do you balance on trying to build a competitive team with young guys, while still maintaining, some professionals who can help guide them?
Oh, and you talk to our coaching staff, and that's one of their biggest concerns as they've gone through this process. And last year we were extremely lucky with who we had in the room. And, what I've asked them is for a little bit of patience. Let's see who's available, and let's see what deals are available and who we're bringing through the door. And as we move forward, we might have to bring back, some guys that have been, character players for us in last year. So we'll have to explore that as we go. But it is definitely really important to have that leadership inside that room. There's, it's a grind when you're going through the rebuild, and you've got to make sure that you've got people that are going to, give you good leadership throughout the whole year.
Well, Bill, we appreciate your time. We like to wrap things up with rapid fire. The only rule is you have to answer the question. Okay.
I'm nervous now.
All right, yeah, okay.
First time I've been nervous.
Well, we'll start.
Frank doesn't look nervous though.
No. Frank enjoys it. We'll start with some easy ones for you, Bill. After maybe after you were named the GM or the Stanley Cup you won, what is Bill Armstrong's beverage of choice, either alcoholic or non-alcoholic or both?
Coffee, Starbucks coffee, love it.
Really? 2
Drink
sugars?
it all night, all day, and I can go to bed. I can drink a full cup and go to bed. It's just doesn't affect me. I love it.
And what's in yours? Are you a double guy?
Oh, no. My dad was like a triple double or whatever. That's just like weight gainer. I'm just black.
Okay. You told us prior to the interview that you've always, your shirt and tie, that's just what you're comfortable in.
Yeah.
Who was your best dressed teammate in your career other than yourself?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh, well, Louis Eriksson is the best dressed human being ever. He looks like a fashion model when he gets off the plane. The worst was, Tony Tuzzolino was the worst dresser in the history of the game. And he played in the American League, and I made him in charge of the fashion, in our team. And it was the biggest mistake I've ever made. They walked on the bus. It was just a disgrace. It looked like Halloween.
So did you give him guidance? Did he improve?
I fired him as the fashion police on our team. That's what I did. It was terrible.
Will you allow your players to just go with sweatpants on flights?
Oh, we've got the fashion days down there, and our players love it. They love the fashion day. They think it's the greatest thing. And I'm just okay on it, because as a GM, if you're in a place on the road and you get your butt kicked and your players are getting on the bus and they're looking like, really fashionable at times, maybe like they just came out of a skateboard park. It's hard to wrap your eyes around it. I'm trying to be one of those new wave GMs. I'm growing to it. They like it, so I like it for them. It's not always easy on the eyes, but I think the new player in the NHL it's coming. It's coming our way.
If Bill Armstrong could wear one suit every day, what would it be and why?
Blue suit, white shirt, and blue or red tie. That's kind of and probably like Hugo Boss is probably the stretch ones are pretty darn good.
Bill Armstrong, you were a very tough guy as you played. Do you get aggressive as a GM, or are you patient?
No, I think I went through my learning process. I was a very hard coach to play for. And I had a number of players come back to me, and, they were my guide. And I used to run these hockey camps, and all summer we'd have 1,000 kids, and it was a massive thing. I had all kids that were 15, 16, 17 employed. And they actually taught me how to manage people and treat people, because they work for $7 an hour. And if you were hard on them, they're like, I'm not coming to work, So I kind of learned how to manage people after I was done coaching, and just managing those high school kids taught me everything about how to get them motivated and how to get them to be their best, with no money at hand. And I think that's why I like to treat people a little gentler, a little kinder now, but that's through learning. That's a learning process. I was extremely hard as a coach.
You've been in the management side and scouting since 2004. You've been a GM now coming up on be 2 years in September. What was the thing that surprised you most about being an NHL GM?
It's on. It's on. Like your wife says, it's a beautiful day, let's go for a walk. And you're like, absolutely, take the dog for a walk. All of a sudden you get a call from an agent. My guy wants to be traded. You can be miserable like in 2 seconds. So my wife has gone through this process where she has, when I scouted, she called it the Never Home League. And then when I first got the job, I put on a few pounds because there's so much food around. She called it the Never Hungry League. And now that I've been a GM for 2 years, she calls it the Never Happy League. There's a lot of different forms of the NHL that's taken place. When you're a GM, it's on. It's just from the moment you get up. We're on a time change. So at 5:30 in the morning, guys like Frank are texting me, "Hey, what's going on with this?" And it's like, whoa, like 5 o'clock in the morning. It's on from the whole time through. So you've got to learn to manage your emotions. It's the biggest thing as a GM. There's a lot of things coming at you, wins and losses, and players being unhappy, and all the things that are in the media now. So you've got to really learn to manage your emotions. It's probably the thing that I've learned how to do the most. Best
piece of advice you got when you were an NHL scout, and who gave it to you?
That's a good question. Best piece of advice is just go back. The best piece of advice is this: 50% of scouting is showing up. You got to go. You got to get out the door and get to the rink. That's the best piece of advice. You'll learn. You can only learn it at the rink. You got to get out there and you got to get your feet wet. And the more you go, the more you learn. And the longer you do it, the better you become at it, because there's a lot of mistakes. You make a lot of mistakes as a scout, but those actually help you in the end because you become a better scout. But it's like a 10-year process just to get your eyes wrapped around the scouting.
What is your philosophy on drafting goalies in the first round?
Well, they turn out to be Vasilevsky. I'm all for it. Listen, in our culture in St. Louis in the scouting room, I thought we did a great job, from Ben Bishop to Binnington to Husso to Hoffer's in there to, I'm missing somebody in that process. But, it's really about having, good people that understand goaltending, and you can find them anywhere. You just have to have good people, and they've got to see the good. If you go to a game and watch a goaltender, you can't say, okay, there's only half left of the glass of water. You got to say, it's 50%. You got to look at that positive side. It's the only way you can draft goaltenders, and they're hard, they're tricky. But this is one piece of advice about giving a goaltender. In their amateur year, they've got to have one game you go to that they win the game. They put the entire team on their back. I saw that from Binnington and Knight and Kitchener in February in his draft year. It stopped 45. He won them the game. Larry Plow and I walked out and said, ooh, he's going to go high. You got to have one game where he puts a team on his back. And that's what we like about Veg Malco. He had 10 of those for us this year.
Bill, great stuff, man. We appreciate it. Frank and I look forward to getting some free vitamin D from you when we come down to town next time. So thanks very much for joining us.
I would love to have you guys in the desert. You guys let me know when you guys are coming. We'll set you up. All right.
Thanks for listening to the DFO Rundown with Saravalli and Gregor. Keep it locked on dailyfaceoff.com and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from to never miss an episode. Delivered by DoorDash.